Hi, it's me. Welcome to yet another new ID E.G.O review for Limbus Company. Intervallo 7.5-1 has brought with us a new double-aught ID in LCE E.G.O Lantern Yi Sang, a new triple-aught ID in LCE E.G.O Ardor Blossom Star Faust, and a new He E.G.O for Ryoshu in Thoracalgia. One of these is an enigma in terms of power, one is about on par with the other equipment in their archetype, and the last is one of the most powerful pieces of support that their archetype has ever received. Curious? So was I, so let's jump into each of them and figure out which is which. LCE E.G.O Lantern Yi Sang is a new double-aught ID for the Rupture archetype, and is one of the most interesting IDs released in a very long time. The first thing to note about him is his new status effect, Fairy Lure. It lasts up to 5 turns, gives his leftmost slot 10 aggro every turn, inflicts 1 Rupture to the attacker whenever he's hit, and 1 more Rupture if he's below 50% HP. It also has 2 very notable downsides. Firstly, it stops inflicting Rupture if the target has 15 or more, and second, it makes him take 50% more damage from attacks. This effect implies that he really wants to die, and his passive actually supports this train of thought. While Yi Sang is killed, the unit that killed him is inflicted with 5 Rupture and 3 Rupture count, with an additional 5 Rupture if Yi Sang had Fairy Lure when he died. If he dies to a status effect, it inflicts to whoever has the least Rupture across all enemies instead. In addition, you also gain 8 E.G.O resources total, 2 of each for the 4 resource types that you own the least of. This effect is frankly crazy, and any Rupture team designed to have a unit die is going to like to having him in the party. His support passive has a similar effect. When your lowest HP ally dies, you gain 4 E.G.O resources, being 2 of each of your least owned 2 affinities. It's a lot less useful than having him die himself, so there's not much of a reason to have this passive in most teams. Lastly, his sanity works different from other units. He gains SP whenever he loses a clash, and loses SP in winning a clash. It may seem counterproductive since most of his skills are positive coins, but it actually plays into his playstyle and does allow him to do very high damage with his skill 3. Yi Sang's defense skill, yet the degree to which the attunement and synchronization are achieved may resultantly allow the user to be devoured, is a 10 to 15 rolling blunt gluttony counter with a single coin, and frankly it's one of the strongest counters in the game to this point. The combination of its high offense level, positive Rupture count infliction, ability for him to gain aggro, and also the Fairy Lure gain makes it a very reliable way to inflict enemies with Rupture count as long as he doesn't get staggered from their attack. It also rolls incredibly high, so it will always deal a good amount of damage regardless. Though it must be prefaced that E.G.O gears are standardized equipment, is a 4 to 10 rolling blunt sloth skill with 2 unbreakable coins. This is where Yi Sang's strategy differs from that of other units. He wants to lose a clash in order to be able to inflict triple the amount of Rupture with this skill. On top of that, the skill gets a fair power bonus on losing a clash if he's being targeted a lot, which helps to make up for the loss of damage that his unbreakable coins would receive. Effectively, this skill is a 4 to 8 rolling skill on Clash Lose, with the coins potentially rolling 7 and 8 with preferable rolls. And I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that he can't inflict Rupture at all when enemies reach the Rupture threshold, though it does kinda suck that he receives no bonus for it. When juxtaposed with E.G.O gear from L Corp, depending on the degree of attunement to the abnormality, is an 8 to 14 rolling Pierce Envy skill with a single unbreakable coin that can technically be an 8 to 15 after a Clash Lose. This skill is Rupture count positive by default and inflicts double the Rupture count after a Clash Lose, though it is a bit difficult to actually lose a clash with it since it rolls decently high. It's probably not something you'll want to rely on unless you already have Fairy Lure, since that way you inflict the most amount of Rupture possible while still allowing the skill to hit rather hard. Lastly, the idiosyncrasies of the source may be utilized with greater flexibility, is Yi Sang's only skill designed for damage over inflicting Rupture. It's a 16 to 1 rolling blunt gluttony skill with 3 coins, and yes, it is a negative coin skill, which is why his sanity gain is all flippy-floppy. It can become a 20 to 5 rolling skill if enough skills are targeting him, as well as if the target meets the preferred Rupture threshold, making its damage incredibly high, and you'll be able to use it with surprising consistency from my experience. Add on to the fact that the skill itself is Rupture neutral means that you don't actually sacrifice your count in order to use it to deal damage. One interesting part of this skill is that it has a built-in way to prevent you from corroding. It gives you 30 SP after its use, meaning your goal is still not to corrode, unlike most negative coin IDs. It's just a really reliable skill on a very unique ID, and there isn't really a situation where not using it is optimal. This ID does technically fuel Dimension Shredder incredibly well, which is nice because it's a very potent Rupture E.G.O. The passive allows him to inflict a lot more Rupture count, and while you won't gain any charge count due to his unique playstyle, you also don't really need it. He also fuels 60% of Sun Shower, which is always a good thing for a Yi-Sang ID to do. So how do you add this Yi-Sang into a team? I'm going to be honest here and say, I don't know. He's a surprisingly consistent ID despite everything in his kit suggesting otherwise, and he synergizes pretty well with Rupture overall. One thing I will say is that he is a terrible addition to any team in a non-chain battle, due to his death not providing any opportunity for a replacement unit to come in, ultimately losing you your max amount of skill slots. I would say he pairs well with the majority of Rupture IDs. Both of the Deviants, all of 7 Association, Lantern Don Quixote, and Saint Merceau. I can't really explain to you why they're good other than that they are Rupture and he inflicts a good amount of Rupture. One other very niche unit that pairs well with him is Wild Hunt Heathcliff. This is because Wild Hunt can technically allow for Yi-Sang's passive to activate a second time, inflicting quite a lot more Rupture and providing another 8 E.G.O resources should you need it. He's obviously not a Rupture ID, but I thought it was enough to be worth mentioning since honestly, that's an insane amount of E.G.O resources to gain. Moving on now to LCE E.G.O Ardor Blossom Star Faust, the first burn ID we've received since Valpurgis Noct 3. She also has the unfortunate trait of losing SP on Clash Lose, unlike the majority of IDs in the game, but doesn't actually have any reason to be losing clashes. She's also the first ID in the game to apply burn to herself, and thus also gains benefits from dying despite her playstyle actually favoring staying alive, unlike Yi-Sang. Her passive gives her up to 5 offense level up depending on how much burn is on herself, and once per encounter will give her 30 burn when at 20% HP or lower. When Faust dies, all enemies are inflicted with up to 3 burn, split evenly from the amount of burn that she had on death, and once again she gives 4 E.G.O resources, 2 to the least owned resource types. However, if she dies to the effect of her own empowered skill 3, she will inflict up to 5 burn and also give 3 offense level up to a unit that gets substituted in afterwards. These are pretty tangible benefits for burn in any fight that has backup units, but knowing how to balance Faust so she doesn't kill herself without reason is a very important part to using this unit. On the plus side though, she can't be staggered or killed by the damage from burn, which is way more important than you may realize. Lastly, her support passive does have a pretty tangible benefit. Inflicting more burn is always nice even when it's limited, and while you probably don't need the extra burn count, it can be helpful in extraneous circumstances. Realistically though, this passive is most useful for a burn team after she dies in the current battle, and thus becomes a support passive that enhances you after letting a backup unit enter the fight. If you're concerned about gaining too much burn, she does have a way to reduce it, thankfully. Resonating by raising ABS Attunement is a 4-14 rolling Wrath Evade that serves as her defense skill, and it can reduce her own burn potency by up to 10 per turn. It also gains 3 coin power for free if she has at least 10 burn, making it one of the most reliable evades in the game. It's also the only evade on a burn ID that you would actually run in a burn team, which by itself gives it a surprising niche for avoiding damage from attacks. Ignition is a 3-11 rolling blunt sloth skill with 2 coins, and it's pretty standard burn skill 1. It should be noted that this is where the majority of her burn potency comes from, giving her up to 11 if she lands both hits. This isn't all bad, the majority of her skills gain coin power based on her own burn combined with her enemies, so this skill can roll 3 to 15 pretty early into a fight. On top of that, the amount of burn it inflicts gets doubled if she has 10 or more burn, which you will achieve after one use of any skill prior to using this one. Plus, this is a sloth skill, which is incredibly rare on burn IDs while simultaneously being incredibly valuable, as it's needed to fuel both capotes as well as literally any E.G.O used by Otis that isn't Magic Bullet. By itself, this makes it worth keeping her alive in battle, at least for a little bit, so you generate a bit of sloth. E.G.O ABS Activation is a 4-16 rolling blunt pride skill with 3 coins, the third of which being Unbreakable, that can become a 4-22 rolling skill with enough burn between Faust and her target. And aside from that Unbreakable coin, there is basically nothing special about this skill. It is her only skill that doesn't inflict her with burn potency, and it can inflict burn count if the target has 15 or more burn, but the skill itself is aggressively standard. It is a great starter, however, since it allows you to use the skill without taking a bunch of burn damage immediately after. Drawn by Flame is a 5 to 17 rolling Blunt Wrath skill with 3 coins that can become up to a 7 to 25 rolling skill with enough burn across Faust and her target, and if Faust has low enough HP. It also appears aggressively standard at first, having a relatively solid damage conditional, easy base power conditional, and decent burn potency infliction. However, when you use the skill at 30 or more burn on Faust, it becomes empowered into a skill that, while much more powerful, instantly kills her after use. But actually, if you use this skill at 23 burn, that happens. You see, the burn gain from this skill is combat start, meaning you might get blindsided by using the empowered skill 3 when you weren't prepared to. Watch your burn, and if you have 23 or more burn before starting the turn, avoid using it if you still want her alive. At 30 or more burn, the skill is empowered into ABS Max Attunement Degraded Corrosion, a 5 to 17 rolling Blunt Wrath skill with 3 unbreakable coins that can become a 7 to 28 under the same conditions as the non-empowered skill, but with 1 more possible coin power from being at low HP. Also conditional on Faust being at low HP, this skill can gain up to 4 attack weight, culminating at being 5 weight under optimal conditions. Other cool things this skill has over its original is inflicting 2 more burn potency overall, the 3rd coin dealing up to 30% more damage from being on low HP, and an inability to die from anything until after the skill is done being used. I'm not sure if this includes taking damage from attacks after losing the clash, though that would be cool if it were true. But keep in mind, this skill does automatically kill her after it is used, so use it wisely or it will just be a detriment. This ID is really bad at fueling Faust's ego, with only Everlasting needing 2 of the Sin Affinities generated by the ID. However, there is an E.G.O to mention, and that's Hexnail. Due to Faust's ability to inflict burn to herself, using Hexnail basically gives her a permanent 10% damage boost from Hexnail's passive. It's really the only one of Faust's E.G.O that this ID has any synergy with, and yes, I'm including her burn E.G.O when I say that. Would it be surprising to hear that the team that this ID synergizes the best with is Burn? She pairs excellently with Liu, Ishmael, and Rodian, Dawn Office Sinclair, and Magic Bullet Otis for no reason other than that they are Burn IDs. You see, the Burn archetype is so small that any adjustment to their main composition right now results in a vastly different team setup. As an example, losing out on N-Corp Faust being on the support lineup means no more easy access to SP recovery from Lust Resonance, which could potentially be a turn-off from using this ID. Despite it being preferable to keep her alive as long as possible, you do get the most value in fights where you have backup so that you using her empowered skill 3 is an option you can entertain. The best options for Faust to die and go into include Ryoshu, Don Quixote, and Merceau. Merceau and Ryoshu can obviously be brought in using their Liu IDs, but they also have powerful options in middle little brother Merceau and Edgar family butler Ryoshu for their incredibly synergistic sin affinities and the fact that they have easily fueled E.G.O that already applies a ton of burn. Don Quixote, on the other hand, should pretty much always substitute in as manager of La Mancha Land, so that you keep Sloth and Wrath while also gaining access to Lifetime Stew for high damage. Plus, you can bring Priest Gregor in the backup slots in order to empower her skill 1 later in the fight. And just like Yi Sang, this Faust can trigger her on-death effect twice if you bring along Wild Hunt Heathcliff. The additional status infliction as well as the additional E.G.O resources make Wild Hunt a genuinely good addition for a free agent in most burn teams nowadays. Lastly, we have Thoracalgia, a new He E.G.O for Ryoshu that comes with 2 brand new status effects. The first one is called Deep Breath, which is gained just from using the E.G.O itself. It has a maximum value of 20, and its effects can only activate if the user has 15 poise with 5 or more count. Whenever you land a critical hit above the threshold, you consume 1/5 of your current poise potency and deal 4% more critical damage for every poise potency consumed. At minimum, this is a 12% increase to critical damage, and at maximum, it's an 80% boost, though you likely won't get that high. It also decreases by 1 each time you get a crit where the boost is applied. Secondly, granted to Ryoshu from the passive, each time the E.G.O is used, we have Nebulizer Beta, the single most powerful poise support effect ever introduced to this point. Seriously, This E.G.O could have been dog water trash shit ass bad otherwise, and it would still be worth bringing exclusively for this effect. Nebulizer Beta gives 3 poise potency and count to Ryoshu and a number of other allies equal to the effect's count at combat start when triggering Pride Absolute Resonance, something that isn't exactly hard for most poise teams. And it does not decay once you have it. This effect is gained at turn start the turn after using the E.G.O, even on its first use. You also gain more based on how many targets the E.G.O killed, gaining double if what it killed was an ally as well. But of course, Thoracalgia is not otherwise dog water trash shit ass bad outside of its passive. It is an 8 to 18 rolling Pride Slash skill with 2 coins and 3 attack weight, but can become as strong as a 14 to 30 rolling skill if used with high enough poise potency and count under resonance. It gains both poise potency and count based on your highest resonance before use, and always gives at least 4 deep breath on hitting with the second coin. Plus, that coin deals additional crit damage based on your combined poise values. This E.G.O does an absurd amount of damage on its second use and beyond due to how easy it makes gaining poise for Ryoshu, plus it gives a bunch more deep breath each time it kills an enemy. The Corrosion is a 24 to 8 rolling slash Pride E.G.O with 2 coins and 4 attack weight, and I actually think it's worth talking about. While at low poise, Ryoshu consumes up to 10% of her HP non-fatally to automatically gain 5 poise potency and count, and the skill actually does increase damage if at least one target is an ally. If it then kills an ally, any other allies who are substituted in will gain 4 poise potency and count, the E.G.O's entire SP cost will be refunded, and you also gain 1 resource for each of Wrath, Lust, and Pride. This is almost enough to make it worth killing one ally to activate the effect. However, the fact that the skill prioritizes allies does not change the fact that overclocking removes the ability for the E.G.O to target an ally. So unfortunately, it won't be practical to do unless Ryoshu gets a negative coin ID that happens to be poise. Hell, it doesn't even have to be poise. Nebulizer Beta is basically free damage for the whole party regardless. There is an ID who is perfectly poised to use this E.G.O, and that's Edgar Family Butler Ryoshu. She perfectly feels the E.G.O, and the fact that you only need 1 Lust and Wrath, both fairly uncommon on poise IDs usually, means you don't actually need the rest of your team to contribute anything except for Pride, which they probably will. That said, Ryoshu has a number of poise IDs, and this E.G.O solves the poise gain issues for every single one of them. It also gives IDs like Kurokuma Clan Ryoshu and W Corp Ryoshu a reasonable means to trigger some easy extra damage through critical hits, thanks to them having a Pride skill, so the both of them also gain significant benefit from it. Since fueling the E.G.O isn't much of an issue, you'll want to focus on making your poise team able to trigger Pride Absolute Resonance as much as possible in order to spread poise as quickly as you can. As such, any strong poise ID with a Pride defense skill is insanely valuable. This includes IDs such as Blade Lineage Yi Sang, Full Stop Office Hong Lu, Full Stop Office Heathcliff, and Pequod Captain Ishmael, and Magic Bullet Otis? There's an interesting interaction here in that Magic Bullet Otis gains poise from her passive, and has a very easy method of maintaining poise count thanks to Sun Shower. The combination of these two things means that she's actually pretty unlikely to be the lowest poise on the team, so she's not likely to be targeted by Nebulizer Beta more than once or twice. Combine that with the fact that Pride Resonance can build her magic bullet count through E.G.O very quickly means she's a surprisingly good team member to pair with this E.G.O. Though if you want a more traditional poise Otis, Sync Association Otis works just as well. The more traditional strong poise IDs still work here as well. All the other Sunk IDs, including Sunk Don Quixote since she is the only one of them that has a Pride defense skill, are excellent to pair with this E.G.O to actually supplement their poise potency without needing to tank their poise count on a powerful skill. The Blade Lineage IDs for Faust, Merceau, and Don Quixote all work exceptionally well for the same reasons, as they are just incredibly good poise IDs overall, and the rest of the Pequod is also a pretty good pairing. Being able to give Pequod Yi Sang a bunch of poise through Nebulizer Beta makes his skill 2 reroll a lot more consistently, which is something he really needs to be worth bringing, and this E.G.O accomplishing that makes him a much more worthy addition into any team. And that's about all I have to say about the new equipment added with the LCB regular checkup event. I really do think Yi Sang is an interesting ID despite not knowing how to use him. And Faust and Thoracalgia are both incredibly solid additions to the ever-wanting burn and ever-powerful poise archetypes. If you want a chance to test any of these out before pulling, or just don't have Yi Sang yet since he's free with enough play during the event period, feel free to add me as I have them all at their maximum level uptie stage in my company with the most effective other equipment on them. I'd appreciate if you like the video and subscribe since it helps me out a lot. I hope my explanations have been useful or entertaining. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.